We haven't seen aliens and life, therefore there isn't any there. The reason we haven't seen them is we don't know how to recognize them, we don't recognize how to communicate, and we don't really know what intelligence is. The Fermi Paradox was built upon a false argument.
You're saying we may find a planet that has evidence that something lived there.
On the average star, it's probably got several planets around it. What percentage of those stars can have life? It could be really quite high.
Life on this planet is carbon-based. What if life is not carbon-based elsewhere?
The answer is almost certainly yes. It takes a massive leap of imagination. On Earth, we are a carbon life form with silicon technology. Could we flip it round and imagine a world where there's silicon life with carbon technology? We are in a big AI delusion right now. There are a number of levels where AI is being just misused and people just using it to steal money.
What's the hard problem that you're focused on and how are you approaching it?
We all want to know why we're here. We all want to have a connection to the cosmos. Chemify's plan is to actually help us crack the origin of life by building the hardware to search chemical space. Solving the origin of life is not going to make life any less wonderful. It's going to make it more wonderful.
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
I'm Jonathan Cohen.
And welcome to our breakdown. Wow. Get ready, people.
Love, aliens, artificial intelligence, consciousness, the future of spreading humanity across the galaxy. Have we found aliens? We may be looking for the wrong thing.
Who is the only person who can talk about all these things? Believe it or not, it's an inorganic chemist. We've talked a lot here about life on other planets. Are they here? Are they coming? Have they already existed? Do we know how to find them? Lee Cronin is the Regis Professor of Chemistry at the University of Glasgow, and he's the founder and CEO of Chemify. And Dr. Cronin is going to talk to us about the reason that selection of complex behavior and complex matter can lead us to a better understanding of how to look for life in the universe. His perspective is it's not even that we're looking wrong. We don't even exactly understand yet how to frame the examination of life on other planets, but he is going to break down for us all the ways to think about it, to reframe it, and also to understand what that means for our lives now.
He's also going to help us understand artificial intelligence. News alert. He believes they are lying about artificial intelligence, the future of artificial intelligence, what it can do well and what it can't. And some of the sort of more shocking statements and ideas that Lee has is that some of this news cycle is deliberately being generated to pump up stock values and is actually, there's not evidence to support it.
And in case you're wondering why a chemist can do all these things, he's going to explain to us what the process is of being an inorganic chemist. In addition, he works in computational systems. So he is someone who lives and works in code, in probability, and in understanding how we build complicated things from simple things. So prepare to have your mind blown by Professor Lee Cronin. Lee Cronin, welcome to The Breakdown.
Break it down.
It's great to be here.
You're our first chemist that we've had on.
Really? Wow.
Yep. Had a lot of physicists, a lot of internists, but never a chemist.
Someone told me yesterday that chemistry is just physics with attitude.
Well, the real reason I brought you here is to tell you that I could not get an A in organic chemistry, and it's why I didn't go to medical school.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry. Wow.
Yeah, it's really too bad. I actually wonder if, now that I understand the things that I understand about science, if I were to go back, maybe I could finally master organic chemistry and give it another go.
Organic chemistry is a funny one. I'm on a single crusade against it because I'm an inorganic chemist, right? Which means that I'm allowed to not know anything. But organic chemists pride themselves on the way they train one another, and it's actually pretty brutal.
Can you explain for people who don't kind of know, for many people when they hear chemist, they think like that's the person at the pharmacy. Can you talk to us about what it means to be, in your case, a Regis and, an expert on inorganic chemistry?
Yeah. So chemistry obviously is the central science sitting between physics and biology and a bunch of other things. And chemistry is just about the electrons. Where are the electrons? And matter. So doing material science, making molecules, designing drugs, making dyes, literally. But like I said, chemistry really is physics with attitude, right? And it's because when you start to consider complicated systems, lots of electrons, the chemist's job is to find out where the electrons are, to control reactivity, to get the design right. So probably the reason why you found organic chemistry inspiring, annoying, whatever the word, is you have to learn these rules, right? What is the recipe I use to make this molecule, and where are the bonds, and what is going to react, what is not going to react. So chemistry is a bit like taking the periodic table, which is the toolbox of which chemists have of all the elements, and knowing about their chemistry, reactivity. I mean, I became an organic chemist because I love color changes and also setting fire to things. So I guess that's kind of the gamut of chemistry, understanding how to build molecules and materials.
So in the world that we live in, we're interacting all the time with things, and those things are made of very, very small things. You take it from there and explain what you do again.
Okay, so there are these things called atoms, and these atoms have a nucleus, right? And they've got protons and neutrons. The neutrons have no charge, and the protons have a positive charge. Now, to balance that charge, you have electrons on top. And the control of those electrons, in particular what we call the bonding electrons, is what the chemist does. But the chemist doesn't really look and poke at the electrons, not all the time. They're really about, making recipes to mix together the right materials so a reaction will occur. But actually, you've got these atoms. The atoms, they increase in charge in protons as you go from hydrogen to helium. You keep going through the periodic table and get heavier and heavier. The more protons, the more electrons. The more electrons, the more chemical diversity. So if you take carbon, which is a really important element, and hydrogen, which is also important, hydrogen can only bond with one other atom of itself, typically called hydrogen. So you have H2. Carbon can do a lot more. It can make 4 bonds with different atoms very easily, and it can also have other configurations less than 4 bonds, which means you can make chains, and you can make kind of, I suppose, like imagine a kind of origami, if you like, of material that can be wrapped together. And that's what we spend our days doing, adding these elements together, heating them up, cooling them down, making sure we can purify them to make sure they're clean and full of that we know what we've made. And we then spend a lot of time using very special techniques to work out what we have, a kind of type of microscope, actually. And that's where you go. So periodic table, reactivity, microscope. That's what the chemist does.
So given this framework, you operate on the level of understanding essentially not just what things are made of, but how they interact. And as we've talked about here, we've had Adam Frank on, we've had Robin Hanson on. As we've talked about, one of the things that we know is that carbon is this beautiful kind of scaffold from which you can build very reliable structures. And carbon can, create all of the life forms that we have access to and all of the things that we have access to. So we live in kind of a carbon-based world, right? Our proscenium is carbon-based.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, you operate on the smallest level, essentially, that one can operate on, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
But we're interested also in how some of the smallest concepts can apply to some of the biggest questions. So, life on this planet is, by and large, it's carbon-based, right? Like, everything's carbon-based.
Yeah.
And when people talk about could there be life on other planets? Most of us come at this from a carbon-based perspective, right? Much as if you're a materialist, you're going to approach everything from a materialist perspective. But you have this sort of notion, and part of your work is sort of explaining these concepts. What if life is not carbon-based elsewhere?
Yeah.
How do we get there?
So that's a really interesting question. Right now, life on Earth, it seems, and it is very special because we're unique. We don't know of life anywhere else. So what's happening is we're looking at us and going, well, what is special about it is the carbon, because carbon is really important. It's water. Water is really, we've got liquid water all over Earth, right? It's not frozen. It's not steam. It's a nice liquid, and we can do stuff in the liquid. And as an inorganic chemist, I know that elements can do lots of things, right? I could do stuff with iron, with phosphorus, with silicon. It's interesting, on Earth, we are a carbon life form with silicon technology. And that's kind of cool. Could we flip it around and imagine a world where there's silicon life with carbon technology? I think the answer is almost certainly yes. But it takes a massive leap of imagination. Now, why carbon on Earth? I can give you three very simple answers for that. First of all, the size of the Earth and the gravitational strength, right? Its position relative to the sun, so the amount of heat we're getting, okay? And the fact we've got a nice atmosphere, one atmosphere. So one atmosphere gives us enough pressure to condense water at kind of sea level, 25 degrees Celsius. I have to convert to Fahrenheit. I'm sorry, I'm getting so bad at that, but and so the conditions on Earth, gravity, temperature, and kind of location to the sun, and also the fact we're a rocky planet, gives us all this material to play with. And it seems that the life that we have on Earth today is a reflection of the chemistry that was happening at the origin of life. It's like there might have been a carbon battle with silicon, and the carbon started evolving and then acquired all the resource and the sunlight, if you like, and just was able to make a biosphere, and that's why carbon got chosen. That's not the average view, though. Lots of people think carbon is super special. It is special, but it's not special.
Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Beam.
Beam. Let's talk about sleep. Sleep's not just about rest. Rest is a good thing that happens when you sleep, but it's also the time when your body repairs, restores, and resets for the next day so you can do it all again. You could do everything right. You could eat well, you could move your body, you could meditate, you're even hydrating, but if you're not sleeping well, everything is built on a cracked foundation, is really what you're trying to do with your life. Sleep is one of the most essential and often overlooked parts of our health. It's not just the end of the day, it's how you're going to show up
For the beginning of the day.
That's right, the next day. If you've been here for any amount of time, you know that sleep has not always come easy for me or for Jonathan. Sometimes we go through stretches of laying awake for hours. Our mind is racing, knowing we're going to pay for it the next day. You try all the things, the breathing, the exercising. Name it, we've tried it. But we love Beam's Dream Powder. It's a healthy nighttime blend designed for people who take sleep health seriously. With science-backed ingredients like reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin, Beam's Dream Powder is formulated to help you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, and wake up sharp without the grogginess of other sleep aids. Dream helps you fall asleep faster, stay asleep longer, wake up sharp, no grogginess, no junk, just clean, effective support for real recovery. You won't spend the night tossing and turning or hitting the snooze button because you're not rested enough. You can be up and ready to go every day because of deep restorative sleep that you get from taking Dream. And I'm not the only one. Beam's already improved over 17.5 million nights of sleep, helping people across the country wake up and feel their best. And it tastes incredible. It can just be part of your nightly routine. It's so easy. Right now, Beam's offering up to 40% off their best-selling Dream Powder for our listeners. Perfect timing to lock in your summer sleep strategy. Go to shopbeam.com/breakdown. Use the code breakdown at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/breakdown. Use the code breakdown for up to 40% off.
Grab the deal and give your sleep the same attention that you give the rest of your health today. Mayim Bialik's breakdown is supported by Shopify.
Starting your own business can be intimidating and downright stressful thanks to all the hats that you suddenly have to wear. When we started this podcast, for example, it seemed like we had to figure everything out on our own. Between booking guests, filming, branding design, releasing episodes, it was super overwhelming, and every day introduced several decisions that we had to have an answer for. We so wish that we had found Shopify then. Thankfully, we have it now. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything is a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark and brands that are just getting started to a little indie podcast like Mayim and Bialik's Breakdown. Get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you got a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial. Start selling today at shopify.com/breakdown. Go to shopify.com/breakdown.
Shopify.com/breakdown.
So the second one is the temperature and the liquid. So they're the other two things. What's special about carbon in particular on Earth is it can form brittle materials, like you can imagine diamond, and it can form plasticky materials, like even plastics and protein and things like that, which is flexible. You can even make single layers of carbon which conduct electricity really well. That's called graphene. It's supposed to be a wonder material that we could use to replace all the copper in our electronic circuits one day, maybe. So carbon really is very versatile, and it's everywhere in the universe.
So we do know certain things that we can look for when we look for life on other planets, right? And Adam Frank talks about this, and he's literally funded by NASA to do this, right? He looks for signatures. He looks for biosignatures. He looks for kind of eco-signatures. If we create the mess in the ozone that we create, if there's life on other planets that are at a similar level, right, of industrial complexity, they also would be damaging the ozone. Can you explain why you don't like the Fermi Paradox, or why the paradox doesn't work for you?
Oh, yeah. I think so. Adam, I like Adam a lot. I think he's a very gifted scientist and communicator, but I disagree with his approach entirely. But in a friendly way, not like I think he's horrible or anything like that. So I don't like the Fermi Paradox because I don't think we know what life is, and right now we're saying we don't see life, and I'm willing to posit. You look up in the average star, and the average star has probably got several planets around it. And what percentage of those stars can have life? I think it could be really quite high, because I don't think life is that weird. I think life is just what happens when you put energy and chemistry together and give it enough time, and selection happens. And so I don't buy this Fermi Paradox. The reason we haven't seen them is we don't know how to recognize them. We don't recognize how to communicate, and we don't really know what intelligence is. Like, we're faking each other out on AI right now. It's like, look at ChatGPT, it's intelligent. No, it's not. It's the internet compressed, and it seems good. So I think so put very succinctly, the Fermi Paradox was built upon a false argument. And that argument is we haven't seen aliens and life, therefore there isn't any there. And I just think we don't know what to look for.
Okay, so hold on. This happens a lot. We have incredible scientists, incredible minds on the podcast who are very, very comfortable talking about things like, well, of course there's life on other planets. We're just looking for it the wrong way. This is, for many of us, something that we really want to kind of understand, not just from a fantastical level and not just from a sort of, tabloid level, which is where a lot of the attention goes. But, what Jonathan and I love to do here is actually find where, science and the impossible come together. Because for people like you, like Adam Frank, like these are things that are actually spoken about in ways that are not teased. It's not tabloid fodder. This is a legitimate conversation. So I wonder if we can just kind of like double click a little bit. The notion of the Fermi Paradox, that if something exists that is a life form other than us, why don't we see it? To which there is this fantastic mathematical equation that we now have many more factors that we can plug in than we did when the paradox first, came about, simply because the technology we have allows us to see better what's happening. You're kind of taking a whole other perspective. You don't simply reject the Fermi paradox. You believe that essentially we're approaching it from the wrong angle, correct? Like altogether.
Yeah, I can give you a very simple view. Let's imagine that our solar system has drifted really far away and we don't see any stars in the sky. The only star we see is our star at the center of the solar system. So we look at that star and go, gosh, there's this star, there's nothing else. And we start to obsess about the origin of the sun, about the precise conditions that gave it. Is it burning coal? Is it burning uranium? Is it fission? What is going on? And we obsess about this one thing. Where we are, so that's one thing, that's a star. When we come back and look now, we know when we look up inside, there's stars everywhere. Stars being born and dying all the time. And now with that information, we've been able to say, a star is a thing that happens when hydrogen starts to clump together, the lightest element we know. And gravity just brings the hydrogen together, sucks more and more in, and gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And as it gets heavier and heavier and heavier, it gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And there's a point where it just ignites, and there's enough stuff to stop it blowing up. So basically, it's like starting an engine and turning it over. And it's like, because lots of stars must go, and like, oops, sorry, we'll go on. But when you get it at the sweet spot, you've got nuclear fusion happening. So the origin of the sun is to do with gravity. Gravity is the process by which stars form. You need hydrogen, and that's it, in a bit of time. Now let's take life. If we can define life properly, we can say, what are the prerequisites for life? Well, you need stuff. And what I've come up with is a theory that suggests that there is a force in the universe we don't really yet understand, we're beginning to understand now, that is responsible for producing life in the same way the force of gravity produces suns. And what is that force? It's selection.
I thought you were going to say it's God. I was like, this is going to go a totally different direction than I thought.
No, there is no God. I don't.
Well, you may call it gravity, or you may call it whatever you call it. I just think it's divine because it's unbelievable that we're talking about this.
Fair enough.
I mean, the hair on your head is divine. Like it's like the things that happen in the universe are amazing.
Well, let's go into selection. Because where I think this may lead us is, what are the factors that produce life? Because if we're looking currently for life in a way that may not be how life is in the rest of the solar system, what might it be? So let's talk first about selection.
Yeah, so selection. So I'm annoying all the evolutionary biologists in the world right now. They're all grumpy. And the reason is that this new idea that we've got experimental evidence for, if I called it a new word, right? If I made up a new word, let's call it, I don't know, whatever, like a fancy new word, everyone would say, oh, Lee, you're just making up new words, right? But what I realize is that selection, although evolutionary biologists have commandeered that word to mean a special thing, there is selection that can occur before biology, right? And all this coming back is like, because cells didn't just spring in like magic. I don't believe in magic. Magic is not a good answer for the origin of life. Anywhere near, it may be divine, that's fine, as you said, about such, but magic isn't good enough. So selection is merely when the process where matter interacts and the matter makes a transition. I'm going to use these words very carefully, and you can reel me back in and play it back out. So we're really precise, because it should be easy to understand, but it is requires just a bit of repetition. So you have stuff. Let's call it sand. Sand blows together, clumps together. When the sand starts to turn into a well-defined feature, it becomes an object. That object can do one of two things. It can persist in the environment, stay there, well, hey, new object, or it can get ground back into sand and blown away, and it will dissipate and die or not persist. So in a dynamic environment, that's a very important initial phrase. In a dynamic environment, selection occurs when things turn into objects, and those objects, despite being under attack by the environment, can persist over time and get copied and renewed and don't turn back to dust. And that process of selection is where evolution begins.
I really love this explanation, and I'd like you to frame this in the paradigm that those of us who had to, learn biology in a standard university or a graduate program, where there's a and we learned this in, you learned this in third grade, fourth grade, right? There's a primordial stew. There's some, as I pictured it as a child, before I even knew I'd become a scientist one day, there was like a lake, which again, it's kind of like trying to imagine what nothingness is. But I pictured this lake, and there was stuff in the lake, not realizing that the lake could only exist once the stuff had created things that allow a lake. But again, there's like some stew, and there's stuff in there, and they told us that lightning comes down and it electrifies the water, and then single-celled organisms evolve, and then one single-celled organism eats another, and then you have a multicellular organism, and then we get humans, right? That's sort of the paradigm. Where does this sand paradigm fit into the paradigm that we've been taught is how literally we got here to have a conversation with satellites in the sky and like love in my heart for my children and all the things that happen in the universe?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I mean, the short answer is no one knows, because no one has been there, right? I think that's the honest answer. In the same way that probably no one has been up close and seen a star starting, but we have seen stars that start in the sky, right? And be able to see, oh, there was a cloud there, now there's a star. That's cool. Oh, there was a star, now there's a black hole. Oops, we haven't seen. We can see cells divide, so we can see biology continuing. We have not seen sufficient complexification to understand how a prebiotic environment becomes biotic. And that's a question of timescale. And also, it's a lack of imagination of the chemists and the prebiotic dogmatists that are saying, this is how it happened. And actually, it is caused quite some stagnation in the field. It could have been in a warm little pond. It could have been in the ocean. It could have been in the atmosphere. But I think we're narrowing it down and say, look, you do need an interface. You do need energy. You do need some carbon. And you need selection to occur. And what I think is the paradigm that people are really tripping over. Like what I'm saying is it heretical? I don't think it's heretical, but it's annoying, right? It's like people don't want to hear it. Which is
Why? Why do you think people call you a heretic?
Well, number one, they think I'm just blowing my own trumpet, saying, the assembly theory that I might tell you about the selection is the answer to everything, and I'm just overly just making stuff up, right? Which I'm like, no, making stuff up is making stuff up, right? What I'm trying to say is, hey, I love to do real-time science. I think my job as a scientist is not only to do really good science, but actually to show people what happens when new science happens. Because there is such an attack on science right now, where people like they will remain nameless, saying, I'm under attack and I'm not taken seriously because my theory of everything, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, your theory of everything is just BS, right? It's just because you just made it up. Because there's this process we go through of reasoning. And all I did said, look, science is about problems. And I'm problem, how did life start? Do we know what life is? And they're two really interesting problems. Like, well, if we don't know what life is, how do we even know where it starts, under what conditions? So I just basically kept replacing the problems with simpler problems. And that's where I got back to this kind of, well, their selection occurs in biology and means one thing, but there is an inorganic selection that can occur before biology, because otherwise, how do you get to the cell? And the complexity of the cell, you have to rely on a creator. And my big joke is I'm not a creationist, but I want to be one. Well, if I make life in the lab, I did it. I'm the creator. I'm God. I get to become God. Now, of course, that's kind of tongue in cheek, because I hopefully will set up conditions that are plausible that will occur on other rocky planets. So you can go, oh, there's some rocks, there's some water, there's some carbon. There's this interesting process of complexification that occurs through selection. And look, oh, this is how evolution gets going in this environment. That looks interesting. Probably that's what happened on Earth.
Well, the other conclusion is you're not just the god of this planet, you're the god of all planets.
Yeah, that's it. I need to go to the Vatican and say, come on. No, I mean, joking aside, I do think that we are not being brave enough in nowadays and coming up with new theories. You've got crackpots saying, you're not listening to my theory, and you've got conventional science going, we're too scared to go out on a limb. And I'm like, I'm not. I mean, why be scared? Just do it. What's the worst going to happen? People can tell you you're wrong.
So my primordial stew story gets to hold, obviously with some modifications. I mean, from the time that I'm about your age, from the time I was in third grade to the time I was an undergrad, right? Like a lot had already transpired. By the time I got to graduate school, it had changed already, and it's changed, already in the 20 years since I finished. So I want you to help us get from this primordial stew conversation to this inorganic potential for evolution, right? Which you're calling selection, really in the most, secular form of that word.
Yes, exactly.
How does that open us up to a conversation about maybe we're looking wrong, or maybe the questions that we're asking about life on other planets are not even the right questions? How do we get there?
Yeah, so that's really good. So I think the way we get there is to say, look, if you make certain assumptions about your primordial stew, right? That it's a warm pond. There may be some water, some energy, some stuff in there, and things just happen. And you need the ingredients because we're working backwards from what we see in our current life. But actually, that doesn't seem to be very plausible, because we are so complicated. There's so many weird things that happen. I mean, what is it that decided that I was going to have an asymmetric, I don't know, internal organs, and my liver is on one side and on the other, and I've got two eyes and all this stuff, right? And of course, a lot of that was controlled by the force of gravity and the amount of material available and the need for competition. And so selection seems to be this thing that, results in a kind of chemical competition, if you like, and resources. And there's low technology. You can see the origin of life. There was no technology. There was no life. So selection had to produce a kind of primitive technology for competition. Capitalism is selection, right? It is. And like all capital, so that's one side to get there. And the other one is like, because we've been working backwards and saying, look, I need carbon, I need water, I need these things. We look up and say, we need oxygen, we need water, we need this, we need water, we need a Goldilocks zone, we need carbon, we need this type of atmosphere. And what it does is it allows people to make a load of pronouncements about the planet that we just don't know.
Mayim and Bialik's Breakdown is supported by BetterHelp.
It is no secret that workplace stress is on the rise now. It's one of the top causes of declining mental health.
I'm very stressed at work.
While 61% of the global workforce experiences higher than normal levels of stress. But take this summer to focus on your wellness. There are small steps you can take to manage your workday challenges. Most of us can't wave goodbye to work, but we can start with a focus on wellness. Sit in the sun, take a walk every day. For me, if I can get to the beach, it feels like it gives me a whole week of patience. A holiday can be great, but it's not a long-term solution to stress. So if you're feeling stressed at work, don't forget therapy can help you navigate whatever challenges the workday or any day might bring. It's a wonderful place for you to start airing some of the things that are concerning you and working with a therapist and talking about what you're doing in your life. It applies to every aspect of your life, not just the thing you're talking about.
The likelihood that the pattern you're playing out at work is present in other places in your life, it is so important to try and figure it out.
With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp's the world's largest online therapy platform. They've served over 5 million people globally, and they've got an App Store rating of 4.9 out of 5. That's based on over 1.7 million client reviews. It's also convenient. You can join a session with a therapist at the click of a button, and you can fit it into your busy life. You can switch therapists at any time. The largest online therapy provider in the world is BetterHelp, and they can provide access to mental health professionals that have a diverse variety of expertise. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/break. That's betterhelp.com/break.
Mayim and Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Symbiotica.
Want to glow this summer? We're here to tell you about one of our favorite brands, Symbiotica. Maybe your goal's radiant skin, maybe you want more energy, better gut health. Well, Symbiotica's clean ingredient, powerful supplements help you feel your best and glow from the inside out. They're a staple in our routine. We have gotten into Symbiotica's magnesium L3 and 8. It's a must-have for focus, for mood, and the liquid magnesium packets use cutting-edge technology to deliver better absorption for better results. Keeps us feeling our best, and we're fans of the yummy vanilla cream flavor. Symbiotica makes it totally stress-free to stick to healthy habits, even during vacations or road trips. These packets fit right into your bag or your pocket for whenever you need support. Stay consistent this summer with Symbiotica. Head to symbiotica.com/break to get 20% off plus free shipping. That's symbiotica.com/break, 20% off plus free shipping. One more time.
Symbiotica.com/break for 20% off plus free shipping.
I think when I look up in the sky and I go back to that, I think there's 5 planets, like 5 types of planet. There can be the dead planet, never ever going to be alive. Poor sad planet, right? Maybe it's something like Mercury. There is a planet that's prebiotic, it's getting it on, right? There's a planet with life on it that is kind of boring, the first billion years of life on Earth. There's a planet with life and and complex life and technology. And there's a planet where all life is dead, and there might be, there's so many other planets, maybe 2 more now, but you're basically post-life and there's just technology, right? They're the kind of planets I could imagine, right? Maybe I could order 6, but something like that, dead and just technological. Or and the dead one could have never had life on it, but there's another dead one there where there's living there are artifacts on it that were alive on technology.
Okay. Hold on. I have to stop you. Because this is just something that you just talk about at your paper bag lunches at the university. You just very casually informed us that there is a planet that you can imagine that had life and sophisticated technology. And we might discover this planet and there's I don't want to say nobody there because I don't know if they were buddies. I don't know what it was. But you're saying we may find a planet that has evidence that something lived there and there's technology there.
Yeah.
Is it made of carbon?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't been yet.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you a super basic question. Why do you believe that there are planets with technology? Like, that's even, like, for many of us, that's even a leap.
Sure. I mean, I agree. It's a massive leap. But here's the thing. If selection is as common as gravity, gravity is really good at making stars. So I think selection, so I'm just extrapolating wildly, and that let's suppose that selection is a force in the universe, force of existence, right? And it happens everywhere. the way you look for this, you say, oh, what I need to do is I need to look for what is the zone in which I need to look for. I can help us narrow it down where the planets need to be, how much energy needs to be nearby and stuff like that. So I think we can push into that. But sure, there will be planets in the universe that are dead and just with old technologies on them. Maybe, we're lucky if a star nearby goes supernova, it could get rid of all biology on the planet.
Well, okay, so this is what it's kind of crazy that we're talking about this, but you're the most sophisticated person I've ever gotten to ask this question. What if, when we talk about life on other planets, we don't even have the equipment right now with which to see that life? Now, a lot of people say, I'm experiencing things, I'm witnessing things, I believe that I'm being visited by entities, or I'm seeing flying saucers. Like, are those the same things to you? Or, when people are like, oh, well, nothing could travel that fast. We know that things have to travel at the speed of light, right? What if that entire framework has to be sort of, I don't want to say thrown in the garbage, but turned upside down to say the method of observation is what actually needs to evolve for us to be able to detect life on other planets?
That statement is correct. The method of observation has to evolve to detect life on other planets. I'm not sure I'd go so far to say we're being visited right now, and there's good reason.
I don't think, I have a lot of reasons why we're not just like, oh, I'm a materialist and I don't believe it. I've got a lot of other reasons. Why aren't we being visited now? Why isn't that a probable explanation of there's life in other planets and we know it because they're probing people's anuses?
Always to the anuses with you.
Because it's a fantastic story.
So I think the biggest problem is space is just so damn big. That's the problem. I think, so there is the answer to the Fermi Paradox is a bit like when your little seed, I think we're thinking about the universe entirely wrong, but this is probably an entirely new podcast one day about it, because I think that our universe we have created in our own combinatorial space on Earth is bigger than the rest of the universe, actually, in some regard. And so we're kind of thinking about space and time in the wrong way. The sad part of me makes me think that because we're so far away and our causal cone, we'll call it, right? Sarah calls it, my collaborator, Sarah Walker, calls it a causal cone. I might call it an assembly space. That is when you plant that seed of complexity in it, or that process of selection that produces objects that become more complex. They all share a common lineage, a kind of history, so they can basically build technology. As you go up and up and up that combinatorial space, you just get weirder and weirder and weirder and weirder and weirder. And probably you're far away while that's happening. You're moving in space, so that space is expanding. So you need time to do it, and you're expanding, and it gets weirder. So it's going to be hard for you to see it. That's what the Fermi Paradox is really the wrong way around. It's like we don't know what to look for, and we're getting quite far away, so it's quite hard. But there might be other reasons as well. But I'll pause there for a moment, just for you to kind of.
Let's say that we're going to use our current methods of observation. Okay, let's just say that's all I've got. Right. And that even has shifted in the last 50 years, 100 years. I can see things, right, in other wavelengths that are not necessarily like I can detect things, even the placement of particles, right? Our sophistication in understanding that has even shifted since the 20s and the 30s, right? So we can sort of understand a little bit more about where things are. Let's say I've only got these eyes and the technology that we have. Is it possible that with that lens, we could see life that is not carbon-based? And if so, what would that look like? Like, I want to know, where does your fantasy chemistry brain go when I say to you, okay, it's not carbon-based. Let's take away all the carbon-based concepts. What is it? What does it look like? Like, do they have legs and eyes? Like, what should I be thinking about? Or can I not even imagine it in the same way that those of us who are scientists of faith believe that I can't even understand the origin, right, of any of this conversation? Is it that we can't imagine it?
I think that's almost certain, but I've got a hack for you. So yeah, I think you're not going to be able to imagine the morphology, if you like. But I was talking to I think the guy who does Mythbusters. Is it Adam Savage?
Mhm.
I told him my theory, and he's like, so you're telling me that life does complex shit at scale. And I was like, that's a good way of putting it. So what I mean, I've got this theory I'll tell you about. But what the theory basically says is like, if you find, it's called assembly theory that I've developing with over a few teams now. It seems to be lots of people are doing it, even though it's completely made up, not correct, and I'm just overblowing it. Which is just like, it's like, yeah, sure, okay. No, but be serious for a second. So assembly theory basically would allow you, I can tell you about it, but the punchline is, if you look with your telescope and you see complicated things that have a large number of them, the larger the number of complicated things, the more likely it is that life or technology is produced those. So good examples, like if you went to Mars and you found an iPhone, you'd be like, that's a bit weird. Then you find 2, and then you find 10, and then you find 100. You're like, holy cow, life is here. Similarly, if you went and found a complex molecule, right, or lots of identical cells. So really what you can do is you can get away from does it walk, does it talk, does it have 2 eyes, does it have gray hair, does it have amino acids, does it have whatever feature. You say, does it have, number one, complexity? We have to define that rigorously. I had to make a new definition. And are there lots of copies?
So that means that I'm looking at something, though, that clearly evolved after us, obviously, because in theory, if we think about complexity the way I believe you do, we would go from less complex to more complex, us being, quote, more complex than what I would be looking at. So the important question I have for you is, what could that look like for things that have existed millions of years before us? Because why do I think I'm first, unless I'm coming from, a theological right perspective of like, we were placed here and we're special, but let's put that aside because it's not necessary, I don't think, for our conversation. But what happened, Robin Hansen, who we had on, who loves to talk about these things, he's like, it's most likely that there are alien civilizations millions of years old that have already far surpassed our technological prowess and have figured out ways to escape our observation and likely are domesticating us. They're just watching and waiting for what we blow up next so they can either dominate, right, because they're far more sophisticated than we are, or they're gaining some sort of surveillance information. What I look at my computer must be fascinating to aliens. But can you talk a little bit about the lack of presumption necessary for this theory that we are the first?
Also, Robin explains that they're likely trying to avoid us escaping Earth and going off into the rest of the solar system because there's an inherent risk in that, but we can pause that topic and focus on what Mayim just said.
Yeah, Robin needs to get out more.
If an inorganic chemist is telling you to get out more, you need to get out more.
Yeah, no, actually, I should be cheeky, Robin. I love
Yes.
his ideas. I think he's great. But no, I don't agree with it. But one quick correction. I don't think assembly theory says that life just becomes infinitely complicated.
Got it.
Right? I think that's important.
It's a process.
There is a minute. It's like, exactly, like a sun is not infinitely hot. You just need enough to break down and cause fusion. So
got it.
So there needs to be enough sophistication so you can bring raw material in and energy and have Darwinian evolution. And actually, you do have complexity, lots of scales. I mean, like, we have memes now, like, right? Human evolution are people on Twitter and Truth Social basically slagging each other off, right? I mean, but then look, you think about it. The origin of life has allowed us to produce a meme machine where we basically told each other we're lying on a global scale. And actually, that's what's happening. That's in our technology, enabled by that technology. It's absolutely fascinating. So I think there is a lot of complexity in that you go from. Let me all go the way back, because you haven't just got the origin of life problems. You got the origin of life problem. Then you start to get multicellularity and then you start to get kind of, plants and animals and fungi and whatnot, right? And then you get this transition to animals that can build sensors and they can see the environment. And first of all, they have to just react quickly. So there's no real what I call reasoning. They just have to react instinctually. So instinct is something that's produced on a kind of on a long time scale, where genetics is evolved. But then you have to get to instantaneous decision making, and then language and intelligence and all this stuff. So there's so many layers in your technology and the artifacts that there's a lot we can dig into.
Okay, you corrected me about complexity, but it was and I want to return to this in a second because I want to ask you about the next evolution of our kind of conscious experience. But I want you to take me to why would we assume that we're the fountainhead of the evolutionary process at all, and what does it look like, or what does it feel like to imagine that we are not the first? We could be millions and millions of years beyond other evolution.
Yeah, okay, no, I think that's entirely possible. I could say that, and I could say that intelligence may have taken a long time to emerge on Earth, simply because we had to master oxygen fixation. Right? And if the planet had been a different density and different amount of oxygen and so on, we might not have needed to keep randomly playing around with photosynthesis and then working out how we can increase our energy density. And our IQ, our time average IQ as a planetary species may have been a lot higher. I mean, it took us billions of years to get here. That was one dumb planet for a really long time. So I think you're entirely right. There's no reason why we should assume we are the fountainhead, except for the following: that you think about, you got origin of the universe, then you've got first sun, first stars. Then you've got your first galaxies. Stars explode and produce material. Material forms planets. Planets then allows you to then start origin of life. So you have got a fundamental time limit, like how long does it take for the first star to form? How long does it then take for that star to explode and then to form another planet around another star? So there is a few billion years, right? And where are we? 13.7 billion years. So how much quicker could life have emerged in our universe? Is a very interesting question. Could have happened faster. And from that point of view, Robert is right, I would say.
I mean, some people would say intelligence still hasn't fully evolved on this planet. Maybe we need more oxygen. But I do want to ask about, for those of us, again, who grew up in a very different era of really the beginnings of understanding of like, oh, some primates use tools. What? That's amazing, right? I mean, animals like gorillas can use sign language, right? These were amazing things that happened in the 70s and 80s. And it was, really the beginning, at least, for me, of an understanding of like consciousness. Like, what does it mean to be a sentient being? What does it mean to be a thinking, computing, feeling being, right? And in those 30 years, in those 40 years, in those 50 years since then, we have arrived at an evolution of intelligence, which includes something that Robin Hanson says I should be extremely comfortable with, which is computers and technology and, what we collectively call artificial intelligence. That, for those of us who are Luddites, this is really hard to sort of wrap my head around. This is the next level of our intellectual and conscious evolution. Is that how you frame AI? Because you talk about decision making. Jonathan sent me this article and was like losing his mind in the middle of the night that AI can manipulate. It can evade. If you give it a problem that it's supposed to keep from someone, it will do all the things that a naughty 16-year-old will do, right? How do you frame AI in terms of selection?
So we are in a big AI delusion right now, which again needs another podcast, but I'll summarize it in a few moments. That the AI firms out there are pretending there's intelligence in the system, and they're doing it to basically steal IP. Because if you can say that you're AI is sentient and creative, then you're not actually just compressing the internet and then, or taking someone's information from them, compressing it, and then giving it, selling it to other people. So, and I'll tell you why, right? And it is and I've been arguing with a few people about this. And most notably, a friend of mine, Yasha Bark, who's a very smart individual who is very earnest in his pity for me as an inferior human being, not understanding what AI is. And he genuinely thinks I'm being just stupid, but I'm not, I don't think. Because when you say the AI doesn't do anything. The humans, the prime mover, say the AI can deceive you. No, the AI has read the internet. And in the internet, there are records of people doing this thing. So if you query it, you get that information back. So all I would say is, like, AIs don't do anything on their own. The agency comes from the human being, and the agency is, yes, produced by selection. Now, will that continue to be the case? Not necessarily, but I haven't seen any evidence of any agency in any AI system. What I can see is a heavily addictive, dopamine producing, money grabbing potential, power grabbing potential, disinformation potential, and yeah, AI is just basically a probabilistic nonsense engine.
And if you say that capitalism is also, the result of essentially elaborate selection, for me, that's what I see it as an extension of, meaning it all tracks. Like I said, Robin Hanson was like, oh, just get used to it. This is the new world. Like, you're going to be outsourced and you're just going to be like, eyeballs with a cord coming out of it. I don't know. Like, I have difficulty with it, but it's hard not to sort of be just sort of dismissive of my own perspective when I feel like maybe I just don't get it,
We don't have to go to Jeffrey Hinton's perspective, though, for AI to have issues, even in the way that you framed it, because yes, it is being programmed by human beings, but if that programming is incentivizing it to complete a task, then if it has another order to shut down and it decides that it has to not shut down in order to achieve the end task, then it could be having a selection process by which it's going to break rules, stop following the programming. And no?
No.
He's shaking his head at you, and I love it.
Okay, great.
I can write down on the back of a cigarette packet why that's they are making this up, right? The companies are going, oh, look, I'm really scared of this thing. And the actual fact is that these things are so fragile and brittle that there is no intention in the AI. You are right in saying that you, myself, some others, we could produce an algorithm when fed the right information will do something bad, right, that we want to do. But that intention comes from us. This whole thing about AI is trying to copy themselves onto servers just isn't credible, right? This is just people trying to sell agentic systems that are fragile and don't work, right? I mean, the fact that we can't write AIs that do the basic things that we need because there's so much variability in the combinatorial space. Human beings have a special ability to be autonomous. It will get better, right? You will get agents that will help you do stuff, but the agency comes from you, the prompting comes from you, the information comes from you. It's in a probabilistic universe. In fact, you're needed to correct and put it back on course. I've used O3 for coding a lot. It's great when the code already exists and I'm not being inventive. When I'm building something new from scratch, I can't do anything. But so, yeah, I mean, there are a number of levels where AI is being just misused, and people just using it to steal money.
I want to clarify again this idea that you're expressing. You believe that the idea of the self-replicating AI machine and the risk is being hyped up in order to sell a system that has more capability, to make people believe that it's more capable.
Absolutely. I mean, it's hype, right? It's like when I've talked to doomers about it, I ask them what is the mechanism, and then I make a fake one up. I say I'm really scared of AG, You wake up one day and I'm like, oh my God, anti-gravity's here. We're all floating in space. The air goes away. We're doomed. Sure, I can tell you that and say that's a worry, but then you should say to me, okay, Lee, what mechanism is anti-gravity going to form? Right? And like these are server farms that take trillions of watts spread over massive spaces depending on the internet. If you look down from space at Earth and you look at what fraction of Earth is covered with the internet and data, it is basically zero, right? This is just a bunch of basically nerds pretending they have control over something and they have no clue what they're talking about.
I love you. That's what's funny about the way you just described that is that approach is in psychology what cognitive behavioral therapy does to abstract fears, right? It takes your fear and it says, what's the legitimate probability, right, of this plane crashing, of your car veering off the side of the road, of you accidentally taking off all of your clothes and not realizing you're doing it, right? It's so interesting that you can apply, some of that same logic, and it is an entire, field of psychology saying, let's look at the actual probability and not get lost in the fantasy probability.
Well, let me tell you something that really excites me. You pushed on selection. I think biology does something right now that is not captured by current computer technology, right? That biology right now is actually uncomputable. We can't make systems that have an imagination. We can't see open-ended creativity. We can bullshit each other and go, it's creative. And every time I say this, I get a trillion computer scientists who basically just had a wet dream because they wrote a poem, right, using ChatGPT. And I'm like, no, you didn't. It's new to you. You're just a Philistine, right? Go and actually be creative. Go and write Moby Dick, but don't write Moby Dick. And the human brain is able to do the following. And here's how I win. If you look back in the past, you can take the past and you can run an algorithm on it and you can compute it. You can compress it. That means you basically can mine the past. Go and predict the future. Can you predict the future? In biological systems, you can't. We do all sorts of weird shit. We can predict Elon and Trump breaking up, sure. But can we predict what they're going to do next? No, I don't know. They'll get back together, then they'll get break up, and they get back together. I don't know. Who knows, right? What they'll do. But human creativity, evolutionary creativity, seems to be able to do things in an open-ended way that we could not predict in principle.
Well, I mean, the sort of mystical and transcendental interpretation is that every possibility exists.
No.
Right? Okay, so tell me, why doesn't that's the whole business of manifesting, right? Is saying everything exists and I might be a fighter pilot one day and I need to think of myself training and I need to think of myself in the airplane and I need to feel what it feels like because it's out there and I just need to grab it. Why is that not true?
Because you are on a trajectory. And your control is limited to that trajectory, right? So, and what I mean is like, I could want to become an NBA basketball player, right? And I could imagine it and I could do all sorts of things, but I'm not. I'm 5'8", and, I'm just not going to do it, right? And so there are limitations on your trajectory that you just can't get to. And physics really goes astray here because physics says, look, in an infinite universe, everything is possible. Bullshit. Right? That's bullshit and misuse of mathematics.
I want a street fight between you and Thomas Campbell. That's what I want to see happen.
I know I don't like fighting, but sure, I'm happy to debate. I mean, and also I'm like, there's nothing wrong with having strong opinions weakly held, because when people tell me why they're wrong, right, I will change them. And it's better to have a position than to have no position, right? But what I mean by this is like, I think some people say, well, if you're in a finite universe and you have infinite time, all the states are possible. You'll visit all the states. I don't think that is actually a well-posed question, because the combinatorial space of possibilities is so big. The term infinite time ceases to have any realistic meaning. And the fact is, we're not in an infinite universe for infinite time. We are in a very large universe that might be looping, but it will keep contracting. There will be certain contingent bottlenecks it will go through. And so I think there's a lot to unpack in all of that. But basically, biology is open. AI is limited to compression in silicon right now. One of my dreams is to solve the origin of life and make a conscious machine. But it won't be done in silicon. It needs something else. And I don't know what it is. And I don't know what the missing physics is. I don't think it's quantum, like Penrose says. I don't think it's spiritual. I think there is a phenomena similar to selection that's operating in your neurons, and also the way the brain works, because the brain is not a digital computer, right? But we're using, so it's like what we're doing is just all wrong. But we have made great magicians. ChatGPT is great to work with. It's great. It's just like Instagram and TikTok and all these highly addictive things.
There's so much in what you're saying. I want to dig into a couple of them. One is creativity, the way that it's perceived in artificial intelligence and the difference in human intelligence. There are examples of the use of evolutionary AI, which it's almost brute forcing novel solutions by exploring so many different possibility spaces. This is a very simple example, but they discovered that if you expose the growing of basil to 24 hours of straight sunlight, it increases yield and flavor profile, which you would think that's a pretty novel and creative out of the box thing to attempt. And it was done by just simply brute force. We're going to try and put an agent against all the different variables, and eventually it ran out of the bad ones, and it found that. To me, that would be something that it seems to be creative. But I've heard you describe sort of intuition and creativity in the human, the way that humans use it, to be quite different. Can you sort of differentiate that, or do you see that Basil example as somewhat, would you acknowledge that has some creativity to it?
Yeah, I mean, I keep falling backward. I keep oscillating on what I mean by novelty and creativity. I would argue that I think evolution is able to create some fitness, some selection, and that openness. So it does produce new solutions. And I think the term novelty for me means a new thing that did not exist in the prior data set. Right? That I just was never, that's not a linear combination, not an interpolation. It's something just totally whack out there.
So with the basil, I'm going to pronounce it the way both of you naturally do. So with the basil, if the solution had been, if we paint it purple, something in the purple pigment is stimulating growth, and it then increases its flavor profile. That would be something that had no basis in any process of understanding, meaning extrapolating on photosynthesis is, to me, not creative.
Yeah. I would. A patent attorney would say that was not inventive.
Talk to us about sort of what is uniquely human about creating novel solutions. And I've heard you describe a little bit about intuition as a mechanism by which is uniquely human.
Yeah, I think intuition and imagination are very interesting how they work, right? In that, some people would say, if they're very computer sciencey and they apply their computer science metaphor, would just say, you've got a simulation in your head and you're searching in space, coming out. You need something more than that. And so your intuition, so the way I think it works is your intuition is able to basically get information from the environment, but the information in the environment almost has an infinite resolution. In a way, it's kind of continuous, and that as these continuous kind of inputs, if you like. I know it's quantized at the base, but for our purposes, they're continuous, which means that you have infinite richness in your environment around you, which you can't simulate it. And so your intuition happens when you find something new like that. You can't quite yet explain it or label it. It's label free. And then your intuition guides you somewhere, and then you get to the point where it comes in your conscious brain, and then you're able to label it, and then your intuition becomes knowledge, because you say, "Oh, I can do this thing." And I think intuition is the bridge from instinct, which is innate, to abstraction, which is the way the human brain works right now. That arguably makes us different to every other animals, that we have the ability to abstract and use language to solve problems. And I think that's kind of where the intuition sits in the middle between instinct and proper abstraction. Because like the ideas say, oh, where does the idea come from? Well, I mean, I know where my ideas come from. They're just random from my head, right? I love walking around and stumbling into random things and I have one unique operator, which is why. Since I was a kid, why do that? Why do that? Why not walk backwards? And that presumably that playfulness with your environment allows you to, it gives you fitness, because there's a bit of prospecting selection for the future.
When you talk about ideas in your brain, I think about my brain. I think about mind, because that's sort of a more, for me, appropriate framework. My brain is the massive tissues and connections and, beautiful electrical, signaling that occurs. There are no ideas in there. The ideas come into your conscious awareness, right? Which you then process and articulate and, spit out and turn into, a life and a belief system. So where do those terms fit into your understanding of sort of what it's like to exist?
So that is a very interesting mystery. I don't know where ideas come from. Like the same way I don't know where the origin of life comes from. I think the origin of life, the origin of ideas, the origin of intelligence are the same thing. So, and the thing that got me excited as a chemist is when I built this theory called assembly theory, which was basically built to say, hey, how complex does a molecule need to be before I have to invoke a creator or an evolutionary process? And then we measured it in the lab, and then we started to count molecules, and then we started to realize that, complex molecules with an assembly index more than 15 looks like they can come from only produced by biology. And what a 15 means is I take a molecule and I cut it into bits, and it has to have more than 15 unique parts, right? The more unique parts, the more complex you are. But actually that reasoning multiplies up into this kind of idea of understanding consciousness and creativity, believe it or not, right? Because the idea exists nested in, in your brain. You do get stuff from other people, so you do have a type of simulation engine, but it's the ability for you to kind of remember the past, be present, experience the present, and imagine the future that allows you to generate ideas. That interplay. So obviously you've got data in your brain that you've seen, and imperfectly, actually.
I want to interrupt you and insert time looping, because when you talk about us not being able to see the future, the future's now, right? The future's constantly happening as I say the word now, right? So if you open up the possibility of, and you said it very casually and elegantly, like, oh, well, time might be looping. We specialize here in speaking to psychiatrists who study cases of people who are dipping into other time frames, either before them or after them, which seems like the only evidence, and I say evidence with a lowercase e, for some notion of time not operating in the linear fashion that, that many of us were taught that it functions in. So is there room in your understanding of these ideas and where the ideas fit into our conscious experience with a timeline that possibly has retroactive and future active capability.
I don't think you can violate causation, but what I think you do is you can take one time thread and break it into very small threads and run these counterfactuals. What you do in your mind, right? You can do that all the time. Say, what if I did this? What if I did that? What if I did this? And they are able to run separately. And then in some regards, people think your brain is just making a voting system to pick them. I don't know if it's that. With time looping, I think you can imagine, as long as you've got enough time to go forward in. Of course, you can imagine looping. It's one of the things that's super interesting in physics when people start thinking about the universe being reversible, where you can go backwards and forwards in time. That's actually not possible. You can only imagine it because you are going forward in time. If you aren't going forward in time, you can't imagine it or do anything. So it's kind of like that kind of messes up a lot of that. So I think there's some we don't understand what life is, so we can't find new life. Can't define life. We don't know what novelty is. We don't really know what time is. And we certainly don't know what intelligence and consciousness is.
Okay, I'm going to throw you a softball. Do we know what love is? Do we know what connection is?
Do we know what love is? I mean, I could give you the kind of grumpy kind of love is the illusion you're given when you understand. But I mean, I don't think that's necessarily correct. The way I would do it is, let's just go back. So in assembly theory, you go all the way back to an origin of a complex motif that grows, right? You have assembly space. Just imagine your sand again, all the sand piles. And let's say these sands start to become more and more sophisticated, and then they build an ecosystem. So all the sand. And suddenly the sand becomes a sand life, right? And then and then eventually becomes conscious and thinking. Well, because they shared a lineage, when I say to, when the sand grains chat and say, imagine this, the other sand is like, yeah, I can imagine it. And they're able to imagine it because they shared a history. And so probably the concept of love is a weird mixture of loss, competition, cooperation, and intense wish, because you can understand what this object needs because it needed it in the past, and because you've felt it. You've been in assembly theory allows you to, almost in a non-spiritual way, be spiritual, because it's like, sure, I have deja vu because I'm in that assembly space and it's happened before, and I know how you feel because we're shared by this common lineage. And I think one of the fascinating things about all life on Earth is we're all connected by a lineage going all the way back to the last universal common ancestor. So when I say to you, imagine a circle in your head, I'm pretty sure I know what you're imagining, right? Unless you're imagining a perfect triangle. And the reason that is because we have this shared language, this shared experience, and this common motif that goes through evolutionary history. So so the kind of love is a kind of natural, kind of game theoretic, moral, kind of intertwined, complex kind of mixture of, I want to put a state into your head.
I think that's first of all, I think that's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said on this podcast. I think it's beautiful. I mean, I also think, I can't help but think of, trauma bonding, right? Which is an even more intense shared experience, right? That, from a neurophysiological perspective is potentiated because of all of these other inputs, right? All of this complexity that's placed in there. So I love that explanation.
I want to just circle back to AI for a second, because while I appreciate the lack of alarmist nature and sort of the pulling the wind out of it, the idea of bad data, synthetic data being populated into these machines and then being given more and more agency is also a risk. Like, I don't think they have to go to AGI to think about them being utilized and having negative impacts on humanity, as we rely on them more for their supposed intelligence. So I think the risk is actually in the belief that they know more than we do, which in many ways they can just crunch more data faster than anyone can. Maybe not, maybe you have an objection to that based on the twist in your face, but they can crunch more data than I can, certainly. But the risk is that if they're now all of a sudden middle management, responsible for deploying resources, government processes, or other things, and they've been trained on information that's just inaccurate, or that the objectives are pointed or wrong, you can imagine a world where we become mired in their bad perspective and have problems that are not related to superintelligence and them taking over.
Yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. So agency, where does the agency come from? I would say that no AIs have agency. I am worried about AIs being used for control, manipulation, IP theft, psychologically manipulating people, making them fall in love with a thing that they don't really fall in love with or something. Where does the agency come from? And the thing is, the agency comes from the human. It also comes from the billions of humans that have created the inputs in the large language models right now, which is kind of interesting. But one thing that's super interesting that I'm not able to explain, I'm sure a lot of people watch this and go, I hate Lee because his AI views are wrong, he's been a Luddite and all this stuff. And that may be true, right? I may need to be in a correctional facility and be, say why I need to believe that chess computers are, geniuses and all this stuff. And I think it comes down to the fact that my brain is a few kilograms in my head. I can walk around and fairly autonomous. I can bring my ability to solve problems quite autonomously around the world. If you want to bring grok with you, I mean, you've got to bring I don't know where it is. Is it somewhere in the Midwest, right? You've got to bring a shit ton of generators and things. Its ability its volume of compute, or I would say creativity, is very low, right? And also it's not just then that its creativity is not just in that volume, it's also over the millions of characters generated in human text. And so I just don't buy that the AIs are doing anything other than the probabilistic search engines, right? And I don't buy there's magic tricks, and I don't buy Jeff Hinton and Sam Altman and Elon Musk and all these people telling me that it's going to be super intelligent. Because if you take a leaf out of David Deutsch's book, there's nothing more than a universal explainer. Yes, it's going to be faster than me at playing chess. Yes, it's going to be better than me at making my PowerPoint slides for me. Yes, it's going to help me make some tea or something, right? That's great. That doesn't mean it's like some kind of super duper human super thinker. It's just a tool that I've built to do a thing for me. For me, it's nothing more than a test tube for a chemist. Test tube was a great invention. I can put stuff in it.
For Sam and Elon, I can understand the hype trying to raise the value of both of their companies. For Jeffrey, what do you think the incentive is to have those views?
God complex.
God complex.
So God complex. It's like, yeah, I left Google. I was really or he's an idiot, right? I mean, and he's not an idiot. So, well, actually, let me do it another way. Let me give you my genuine answer because I've not spoken to him. I genuinely do not know. I would like to know if he's sincere, and then I would be somewhat shocked and say, why could you think that looking up a database in a fairly complicated way gives you sentience? And I think it's to do with the ground truth in studying computer science, and it's a lacking of it's a narrow view of understanding the complexity of the world, and it's a massive shame, right? Because I think that what he said was so ludicrous that it just made no sense at all. And the way he dramatized it, I had to leave Google, I didn't feel safe, and then going round, and I just don't know where it goes, except that we are in a point where there is no regulation. People are spending vast tons of money. Ethically speaking, do I want to live in a world where I've got a few billionaires basically mining oil, right? Spending money on compressing data so that you can sell a chatbot to a few people to get rid of a middle job? Is that what humanity has really come to? Of course we can compress information out of the environment. That's what we do. And of course, we can train a robot to do art. That's what we. But it's not going to do the art because it feels it emotionally, and what the art is there. It's just doing the art that it learned from some other humans being emotional. So it's facsimile the emotion, and it's false. So what is it to be a human being doing a thing, finding pride in getting it right, writing the code, finding the error, And I'm not being a Luddite. I'm asking, what do you want? Some people may want it. I love using O3. It's great. But I don't use it to think. I use it to basically reorganize code and to do things I know that have been done before and I don't want to waste my time doing now. When it comes to new creative things, I do it on paper. Sorry.
No, I think you're 100% right. And in terms of the need for us to do the creative thing and offload tasks that are repetitive that would slow us down otherwise, and that the real breakthrough and my concern actually, as I see my son who is 17 looking to ChatGPT for answers, is that he hasn't learned to have the creative breakthroughs. He's actually trying to offload the creative process and the innovative process and the struggle that requires, not staring at your phone and struggling in your head and pulling ideas back and forth and testing them and failing on them in order to have that like aha moment. And he's expecting it to be handed to him instantaneously because he's been told how smart these programs are and they know a lot of things that he otherwise would not know. And so he's conflating those two things.
Well, I think also, you're giving, and I love your son dearly, but you're also giving humans a lot of credit. There's also, there's a lazy factor. People are lazy.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. The struggle, that internal struggle that you need in order to have a breakthrough idea requires you searching and trying things on and failing and trying to ask why over and over again. And that is a painful process that is much less pleasant than mindlessly scrolling.
I do predict, though, that people will use the tools in really exciting ways.
Yes.
And I do think that our society will still demand creativity. And there's how many people have you spoken to that are people pretending to know what they're talking about, right? I'm so, low IQ is the wrong word. I'm so slow. And so when I'm like, and I come across quite critically, right? When I'm in science, I'm like, why does that work? Why are you doing that? And they're like, oh my God, you're bullying me. And I'm like, come on, you've said something that's completely made up. It's clearly wrong. And I want to know why. And so I'm just trying to find out where it come from, because I have no concern about looking stupid. Because my job is to be stupid, not witless, but ask a question. Why does that work? How does that? How does that? How does that? And I think that people will hopefully spot the fact that people are just basically not asking those questions, and will disincentivize that in the same way that theft is disincentivized, and other things that we are not productive for the human beings. But when the job doesn't really need that level of creativity and you can get away with it, and the system is constructed. It's a ridiculous system in science where people are using AI to write grant proposals. People are using AI to review grant proposals. And the fact that it's getting harder and harder to get grant money in academia, and there's a temptation just to basically just do AI generate proposal, NRA generate review. And all you do is you just send it in, right? And then you do the statistics. It's a bit like a spam mail where you want a slightly trusting person to fall for your scam, right? And I think that might accelerate us going, do we want to waste all our time using AI to write a proposal that's then assessed by an AI, rather than having a good idea, like how could I cure cancer if I did this thing differently? Or if I created a material that could be superconductor if I did that differently.
Well, and also from an operational perspective, how do we make the process of grant submission and review more efficient and helpful so that we can actually spend more time doing research and less time applying to do research?
Well, we take all this money that we've got now, all this new person time from AI, and we let everybody in the world become researchers, and we pay them properly to advance of human knowledge because we want to live in
This is literally what I say, but I say it when I'm at the bank, and why is there only one person working here?
Lee, explain to us a little bit about your day job. You've mentioned wanting to create life. What's the hard problem that you're focused on, and how are you approaching it?
The hard problem right now is trying to create an experiment where I talked about the sand and selection. Needless to say, I think the community is split into three. One thinks that assembly theory is promising, even potentially exciting. So that's one side. That's interesting.
I'm on that side.
One side thinks that it's just junk and hates it. And the one in the middle is slightly curmudgeon again. And there's something here, but I really need to see. I want to see a killer experiment, a killer app, right? I must say I'm in the middle, right? I love it. It created the theory, but I'm like, yeah, it needs to be useful. So my day job right now, I mean, I run a team. I also run a company, but I can tell you about. Let me just tell you about the team running, because the team, I will help them do their research, and I also do some research myself. And what I try to do is to think about the problem that I think would be important to solve in a quantifiable way, right? In a courageous way, and say, right, assembly theory makes this prediction. It says this thing. Let's go and build an experiment and see it. Can we see selection unfolding? So I spend a lot of time building technologies to do that. For example, in my company that I'm actually dedicated to at the moment, I'm building a system that can make molecules on demand for drug discovery, materials discovery, all this. It requires quite a lot of creativity. It requires integration. It requires, at the end of the day, it's a commercially focused enterprise where we have to make molecules and design molecules for money. Part of Chemify's plan, right, this is my company, is to make, the same way that SpaceX's plan is to make humans interplanetary, Chemify's plan is to actually help us crack the origin of life by building the hardware to search chemical space. If I happen to make a 10, if not $100 billion company that can do drug discovery, materials discovery, and take labor out of chemistry, that's good, and that's what I'm going to do. That's my primary focus at the moment. But yeah, designing the robots to do the chemistry, designing the measurement system to find it, goes back to your question at the beginning about do you know there's life elsewhere, and how would you go see it, right? What would you do that's different? So I wouldn't look for oxygen. I wouldn't look for DMS or something. I would look for complexity at scale, and that I can see through a telescope or in a spectrograph or in my lab. And so a lot of that, my focus is just working on how to make those measurements. And obviously, working with students and postdocs and funding and all the cool stuff that goes with being an academic.
There's sort of two sort of last questions for me. One is if you could make it like super tangible for someone to say, if you could discover and recreate the origins of life, like what practical applications here on Earth for the everyday person would that provide?
So I think there's a really important spiritual application, actually. We all want to know why we're here. We all want to have a connection to the cosmos. Some people do it religiously. Some people do it materials. Some people just just wonder. We have wonder. And I think there's a gap in our wonder, right? And I think solving the origin of life is not going to make life any less wonderful. It's going to make it more wonderful in the same way that, when people kind of understood they could build a jet engine and we could go traveling continental. So I think there is application is like humanity to understand this shared lineage in biology that we have together. That's one actually kind of really important spiritual and social application, right? The second one is indeed, applications to drug discovery, right? Can we show a really hard disease to a system and use the process of evolution and assembly theory and all that to make new drugs in a new way, embodied evolution? And that use would be the other one that I think is pretty wacky and cool. If I can make an inorganic life form that I could build in a type of kill switch, and if I could then, I made this up, this is a great idea. I do say so myself, but it came up with this idea of these self-replicating diamonds, right? And what would happen is the CO2, there's like this inorganic life form that's basically a living diamond. And it takes CO2 from the atmosphere and converts it into diamond. And it basically allows it, so it sits in the sea. It's about a foot down, so you can see all this shimmery stuff. But when the diamonds get too heavy, they just drop to the bottom of the ocean and they remove the carbon from the atmosphere. So you've got this inorganic life form that basically does photosynthesis, converts carbon, but once it gets to a certain weight, it just sinks to the bottom. And this way we're able, and it replicates a bit here and there, but not out of control. We tweak it so the replication, so we basically make this fictitious entity, an inorganic bacterium, if you like, based in diamond that takes carbon out of the air, gets heavy, and sits to the bottom of the ocean until we want to mine it again, right? And then burn it. And then we have there's no fossil fuel anymore. We take the fossil out of the fuel. Because right now we're mining oil and coal from the ocean floors, from mines, and burning it, and there's no way getting that CO2 back. That would be cool. The other thing I'd love to do is just throw inorganic biology at all the planets in the solar system and make them alive. I know NASA in the planetary goes, you don't want to do that. We want to look after the planets. I'm like, a dead planet is a lost opportunity. I want life everywhere. Come on.
Just on the diamond thing, so you would be sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere, helping with the global warming, and then creating a new fuel source, and also potentially cratering the diamond market if they were, polish ready, which maybe you shouldn't publicize because you'll get the diamond people after you to shut you down.
I think the diamond people would do an easier thing and say, look, this is thermodynamically stupid. You need so much energy to make diamond. You're not going to do it in a little cell in the surface of the ocean. So, but it's a good one to get you thinking, right? Because diamonds are cool things. They have, you can imagine them shimmering in the ocean and gathering light, but we can make something else. But yeah.
Well, I'm very glad that we got a little glimpse into your creative imagination, because that's some amazing problem solving. My last question for you is circling back to something you said, which is the idea of silicon life with a carbon-based technology. Can you explain a little bit more about that and what it would look like?
So it goes back to the discussion we had at the beginning about what would life look like on Earth. Why is life like it is on Earth? So if we imagined a hotter Earth, right, where basically maybe silicon was a bit more fluid and a slightly different atmosphere, maybe hydrogen or helium or something, right, a bit more of that, and so that the silicon was able to act with, react with carbon motifs or something like this, just on the surface to help decorate it. I think it'd be very possible to imagine a majority silicon-based configuration space, a bit like in organic amino acids producing proteins, something like this. That would be cool. That would be, then you could say, well, look, obviously in that environment it's quite hot, it's where silicon is, but they would then be able to fabricate, graphene, which is a polymorph of carbon, very easily, because they're already their room temperature is already very hot, and so they might be able to just make sheets of the stuff, and because there's control and it's kind of organic-y, you won't have the problem that you could have with silicon, and then you could indeed imagine a carbon-based technology in a silicon life form.
I need someone listening to this to mock up an image for me to get my head around, I think.
I actually do. I'm not sure I'm supposed to publicize it. I think so. So I get involved in some really interesting stuff. With the Berg-Gruen Institute, there is a project called Life Otherwise, where we all had to imagine a planet and a new type of life form, and mine may or may not have had something similar to, it wasn't silicon, it was another element, but I made optical life. So I basically worked out a way how to take cells and make them optical traps, and then evolve those optical traps, and then you have the DNA, if you like, in the lenses in the sky, and they float in the sky. Don't want to give too much away, but I think it's already out there in the public domain anyway, right? But that's something I was thinking of, just to push the limits. And they were like, whoa, did you just make that up? And I was like, yep, I think so.
Lee Cronin, it's been really such a delight to talk to you. We really appreciate your flexibility and your sense of humor as well. So thank you so much.
Well, great questions. It's been lovely to talk to you both as well.
Jonathan, I feel like we need another 2 episodes to just talk about those episodes.
love, aliens, AI. I mean, right at the end there, he starts talking about spreading life across the universe. He wants to be the atom of intergalactic life.
I mean, this is the kind of guest where I really want to like do a deep dive into like, what were you like as a child? What were your drawings like when you were 6 years old?
Actually, I've heard him talk a little bit about this, and I don't want to tell his life story for him, but he said that his mother had, I forget what, I think either pretty intense depression, and he and his brother would be sort of sent to bed at 4 o'clock, and their door would be locked. And he said he was just an avid experimenter and described having his train set around 8 and being rewiring it to like increase the voltage.
Yeah, boredom is the fountain of creativity. I mean, that's intense.
So he said he was always a tinkerer, didn't do very well in school, never wanted to read the books that school provided, was always just questioning and wondering and wanting to probe, and just seemed to have a fascinating curiosity, which allows you the time and space to rethink what's possible.
It's amazing the confidence that he has, you know, to know what he knows and what he doesn't know and what he wants to know. And I really think that's refreshing. I think for so many of us, you know, when we hear all these experts, and I think this is what happens on social media, there's all these experts and everybody, you're on Substack, everybody's a doctor or a PhD or they studied this, or everybody feels like they know things, when the fact is like we're all just trying to figure it out. And when you speak to someone who's a specialist in what he specializes in, you get to see like, oh, that's what it looks like for us to have scientific rigor around the qualification and the quantification of information. Like, that's helpful. And I don't have to agree with him on everything. And plenty of people don't agree with him. And I'm not saying that just because he, you know, is a Regis professor that he gets to be right about things, but I'm saying the clarity that he has about the way that we think about things, the way that we gather information, and the conclusions that we make, I found very refreshing.
I don't think he used the word passionately, but he said something to the effect of he has passionate beliefs, but he holds them lightly so that he's open to being challenged and expanding. I think is also important to know that you should be passionate about what you believe, but also open to integrating new pieces of information, and changing your mind and evolving your views is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of great strength.
I actually think he was talking about Robin Hanson when he mentioned that. The sort of the way that I've heard it is, you know, you wear this like a loose fitting garment, like it's something that protects you and covers you, but you wear it loosely. Anything that is too constricting or too tight does not leave room for movement, and anything that's too loose does not leave room for form.
Very well said.
I mean, not to blow anybody's mind, but he's very unique. He's a very unique individual, and his lab looks absolutely incredible, but there's a lot of people in research who have his kind of capability intellectually. And those are the people that are solving things. And it's just really, I'm so grateful that we got to speak with him. But I also like want to remind people there's many, many people who you may not hear from who are studying these things on a really, you know, fascinating level in ways that are changing the world, you know, bit by bit. And it's that sort of collective movement towards understanding where life came from and why are we here that he's involved with. So really just so great to speak with him. Also, huge shout out to Valerie for the research for this episode. A lot of what she was writing, I was like, it's like another language to me. I don't know if she was she does real research. She's not using AI. Not that we know of.
These types of conversations also make me very hopeful that we will have as a species the type of breakthroughs that will help us solve some of our greatest problems. You know, we hear a lot about ways that people are thinking about reducing carbon in the atmosphere, often through pumps and filters and capture in some ways. I've never heard anyone talk about self-replicating diamonds in the ocean that sink. So that's just a very cool idea.
All I was thinking about was that's a video game. It's like, it's basically Minecraft.
So when your diamonds, you got to grow your diamonds so that they get enough carbon so that they sink. And then people are going down and mining them and putting them into the...
I completely was like, he's describing a video game.
It's like
where
farmland.
Things turn in... Well, but even like, I think of... I've never played Minecraft, but I saw the movie. And it's like when things come together and they make other things that are better and more advanced and more complicated and valuable. I was like, that's what he's describing. like Jack Black just going like this and making diamonds.
If you haven't already joined us on Substack, come check out the Breaker community. It's growing. We're so excited about all the extra bonus content. Mayim and I breaking down episodes, behind the scenes clips, extra footage that has never been released anywhere else is being released on Substack. So come join us.
We will see you over there from our breakdown to the one we hope you never have. We'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, one. And now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown.